And I will introduce our speaker. Is it Kelle Ryan.
Well, I want to thank you all for having me here. I'm delighted to be here in person. And thank you for your attendance. Those of you that are here have some gift bags for me. If you live near someone who couldn't make it today, maybe you can get a gift bag to them. And if not, we're going to donate the remaining gift bags to the library because I'm sure they will love that. So when I was asked to come here, I was given a chore of talking about poisons. But then I said, well, I'll also speak a little bit about the differences between writing murder mystery and writing romance. And then I realized that that's actually a whole presentation, not just a few off-the-cuff remarks. And so you get to be the first ones ever to hear this presentation. And if you have ideas for improvement, or if you find me a little bit rusty at it, it's because it's brand new. But let's dive into what we have with the difference between romance and mystery writing, because I think you'll find there are a lot of similarities. And my mouse doesn't want to work on this. So, all right, we'll do it this way. Okay. So the overview of this is I'm going to go into the differences between mystery and romance writing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to plot a mystery. And when I'm talking about that, I'm really only going to be addressing the process that I use because I can't speak to others' processes. So there may be other ways of doing it, but I'll be sharing with you what I do. We'll talk about some types of mystery because there are interesting changes in the industry and overlaps, and I'd like to point those out to you. And then we'll talk about whether or not there can be romance within the mystery itself. So without further ado, we'll go into the overview. I want to start with the readership. So if you look at the readership of the, cozy mysteries, you have a predominantly female readership. Largely people 40 and over tend to make up the bulk of the demographic reading cozy mysteries. There have been efforts to attract younger readers, and there are changes going on within the industry that I think will widen that base. The next thing is that it attracts educated readers. And when I say educated, it could be college degrees or postgraduate degrees, or it could be entirely self-educated. So what I mean by educated readers are people that are curious, that always want to learn new things. And that intellectual curiosity is stimulated by the plot lines in murder mysteries because the readers will be trying to solve the puzzle of the murder or whatever crime you're dealing with. And so that's why I say it attracts educated readers. And some additional insights is that readers tend to focus on character relationships like they do in romances. And I'm going to flesh that out more, and we'll talk more and more about what kinds of relationships you see in cozy and murder mysteries versus other types and how that's changing. It's typically a lighthearted storytelling. It's not deep and serious. And there are these days getting to be more and more new subgenres to the murder mystery genres. If we compare that to what we know about romance, this was interesting. Romance readers are now about 80% female, but recently we've had an uptick in the demographic of men reading romance, which I love. So about 20% of our readership, according to current trends, is male. The typical age demographic is 18 to 45 years old. That's where the biggest bulk of readers fit. That's 44%. And then on either side, you get smaller percentages out. It used to be 35 and above was the bulk of romance readers. And so that's starting to tick down. And from what I can tell, people think that that is the Gen Z readers and TikTok. And as much as I try to be apolitical here, but I was really rooting to have TikTok banned in the US so I didn't have to learn it. Turns out didn't happen. I have to learn it, but that's where we're going to find new readers in the book talk section of it. And don't look to me for advice. I'm still learning myself. I did have a PR firm make some really cool videos for me to use there though. Next, again, it attracts educated readers in general. I know that the people like to make fun of us and say we're not for educated readers, but they are wrong. They don't know our readership. And they tend to live in the South and the Midwest of the US, the largest proportion of romance readers. I thought that was interesting. And then also, most of them discover it right in their preteen years, 11 to 18 through the teen years. And once they get into romance reading, they're hooked, and 35% of them have been fans for over 20 years. But what you see is that these two demographics have strong similarities, which means we can take advantage of bleeding over from one genre to another to build readerships. So I'm not going to belabor romance fundamentals because most of us here primarily are romance writers, but I'll start with a few. We know that we have a central love story in a romance. We know that emotional conflict, in addition to any external we throw in there, and character growth is what drives a romance. In romance, we tend to have 2 points of view, the two major heroes. And if I slip into old language of heroine and hero, know that it can be any set of heroes. It can be hero, and heroine, male, female, whatever. The two major romance characters, we usually have dual point of view. We always have a happily ever after or a happy for now. That's one of the promises of the romance. Just as in the murder mystery, the promise is the crime will be solved and justice served. If we veer from those two core principles of what we're doing, we're going to disappoint our readers. And romance, of course, we have multiple subgenres that cover the gamut. And within each of the subgenres and subgenres to subgenres, we have varying heat levels. So there's a wide range of what people expect from romance reading. And I would say wider than murder mystery, but that is changing as well. So the fundamentals of cozy mystery is you're focusing on that puzzle and that crime instead of a relationship. Typically, you'll have an amateur sleuth as the protagonist. So somebody not trained in detecting, not trained in police procedures, just an everyday person. And the fantasy is that this person who's a lot like me solves crimes, maybe I can do it too. They tend to be in small towns or closed circle settings. So they have a small cast of characters that goes from book to book. There's minimal graphic violence or explicit content. So there's no sex and no gore on the page. You can have someone whose head is bludgeoned to death, but you're not going to show the bludgeoning. You're not going to show the sleuth walking through puddles of gore and blood spatter and stuff. If you're doing that, it's not a cozy mystery. And the emphasis is on curiosity and using that curiosity to achieve justice for the victim. So you were going to focus on clues, not relationships, but clues. We're going to use misdirection to plant false clues and get the reader and the protagonist to look somewhere else where they shouldn't be looking. And then we can play with the community, and I'll get into more of that later. They tend to be a single character point of view, and that's the point of view of that amateur sleuth. And on top of that, it's usually a first person or a third person limited, which is what we all just call third person point of view. So in terms of plot, there are differences as well. In a cozy mystery, your plot is going to start out with seeing your sleuth in the everyday world for him or her. And generally it tends to be her. Then the crime or the mystery is introduced. And then you get your clues and your red herrings, and you meet a number of different suspects. And throughout, just like in romance, you get increasing stakes in terms of solving that mystery, and the sleuth may eventually even be in danger. And so that's part of that, building the tension in that arc. And then at the end, the mystery is solved and justice is served. In romance, what we do, we still start with the everyday world and our inciting incident. The inciting incident in the cozy mystery is that crime happening. In romance, we have our characters meet, of course. They develop attraction, and then the conflicts pull them apart. And this developing attraction pulled apart by conflict, but attraction pulls them together, forms the push-pull that kind of propels the romance readership and that sense of tension and keeps people turning pages. And then you end up with your emotional or relationship crisis. We used to call it the big black moment or the dark moment or the all is lost moment, but it's that point when everything falls apart and you're not sure if it can get put back together again. And then the resolution in HEA. In the murder mystery, you're mostly intellectually driven. And in the romance, pardon me, you're more emotionally driven. Oh, let me get the water should help. Thank you. In the murder mystery, you're going to see that you have a bigger cast of characters in a bigger world, and we're going to deal with secondary characters differently than we do in most romance novels. Now, there are secondary characters in our romances, but they tend to pack up and go away at the end of one book, even if the second book is set in the same world. So only certain large worlds where you have maybe a special forces team and the brotherhood of soldiers who all go find the love of their life and they still interact with one another. In those cases, you may have more characters in your romance, but you'll have a cast like that in the murder mystery that you'll want to keep going from book to book. And then you have puzzle solving satisfaction for mystery, emotional satisfaction for romance. Let's compare the protagonists. The amateur sleuth is your main protagonist in your mystery. The nice people say quirky, curious, and persistent. The other way of putting it is that she's the busybody who thinks she can poke her nose into everybody's business. And she likes to listen to gossip and adores, it doesn't matter. The hero in the amateur sleuth has to be likable and relatable, but not perfect. And your supporting cast, you're actually going to have two kinds of supporting cast. You're going to have a supporting cast for your series, which you're going to want, and a supporting cast for each individual book. But you've got secondary characters, you've got suspects, sometimes you have animal characters. In romance, you've got two, whoops, go back. You've got two leads instead of one major lead, and you've got strong emotional conflicts. Personal growth is impacting your love story. The supporting characters are there just to enhance and give voice to other opinions for the romances. They serve a completely different purpose in murder mystery. They become the suspects. And you've got relationship as a key driver in romance versus not in cozy mystery. But here's what I call the twists on mystery. And this is where I said it's changing. And it's changing so that the relation aspects of murder mysteries are actually gaining a lot of popularity. And I will come back to this point, but I contend that mystery readers read as much for that relationship as they do for anything else. They just don't realize it. Multiple third person and points of view are sometimes seen. I happen to use multiple third person points of view in my Undercover Cat series because I want to be in the head of certain characters. So I have a chemist who finds her boss dead, gets accused of the murder, and thinks she's smart enough to figure out who killed the boss. Along the way, she runs into one coworker who it turns out is a spy. I need that spy's point of view in different parts of there, and the heroine needs to not know that. And so I have to go into his point of view. And then there's the hot detective that will eventually get a point of view, but in the first book in the series, he's looking at my protagonist as primarily a suspect. But so I have 3 points of view to play with, and it's becoming more and more common that there'll be multiple points of view, but I'm kind of breaking some of the norms. There are becoming more subgenres within murder mystery. It used to all be sort of contemporary, and that's what you get, but you get paranormal and historical now, and settings are starting to get diversified. So there's a ton of things that are changing, and the lines between what's called the cozy mystery, which we're thinking about, and a traditional mystery, those are also starting to blur. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's cozy and what's traditional and what that means. And I had to actually delve into this to learn it because a couple of my reviewers say I border on cozy and traditional, and there's a little bit of that element there. So I thought, I wonder if I can learn more about what they're talking about as I prepare this talk. So, cozy mysteries evolved. First, we started, Agatha Christie was really the beginning of cozy mystery as far as I'm concerned. You had Miss Marple, the quintessential amateur investigator. She was retired, she's a busybody turned sleuth, and everybody loved her in her little small village. From there, we got a lot of things which I call the sleuth second act. So in a lot of more contemporary mysteries, you're going to get divorced, widowed, fired, retired, or left her job in the big city for opening a tea shop in a small town type heroines who are the amateur sleuth who are recreating themselves. And there was the rise for the longest time of what they called the merch category. That's the heroine who has a coffee house or a tea shop. She may start a bakery, she may start a yarn or a craft shop, or be a sole business proprietor of any kind of business. I know one who ran a small store and did gift baskets as her major thing. But they'll typically be sole proprietor of a small business that somehow brings them into this milieu. Lately, I think I see more diversity of careers within the cozy mystery genre. And I think that also reflects how our personal demographics are changing. We have more young career women and lifetime career women out there who are reading, who want to see themselves reflected in a story. So when I started writing my Undercover Cat, I wanted a scientist in the story because guess what I do in my day job? I am a PhD chemist who works in water treatment, and it seemed like it would be a cool place to murder somebody. And so I think that as that reflects more and more of our reader populace, people will read more and more of it, and people who were used to reading the tea shop party planner sleuth may be open to other careers. And as I said, cozy traditional. So let's look at cozy mysteries versus traditional mysteries, so you know a little bit what I'm talking about. So the protagonist in the cozy mystery is this amateur sleuth. In a traditional mystery, it's going to be a professional detective or someone in law enforcement, something that has a background that lends them to it. The tone of the cozy, as I said before, is light and humorous. You can get more serious in a traditional mystery. So if you think of any of your TV shows, we used to like to watch The Rookie, which is Nathan Fillion being a cop at an advanced, starting at 40 or something like that. Those murder mysteries are a little bit more serious than if you come over to Elspeth, which is the new murder mystery thing. She's a little quirkier. She's closer to the amateur detective, even though she's allied with the police force. So that's where those lines are blurring, but Elspeth is closer to the cozy side, and Nathan Fillion in all his glory is closer to the traditional side. He was also as Castle too. The setting in the cozy mystery, for most of the time, it's been a small town or a small intimate community within a larger town. The traditional mysteries tend to use more urban and diverse locations. And so that's one historical way of dividing them. Both tend to have all of the violence off of the page. It can be a little bit more on the page in traditional. It's just absolutely a no-no to do it on the page in cozies. In cozies, you may start to see romance as a subplot. And depending on which author you're looking at, that subplot may be a little heavier or a little lighter, but you almost never get it in the traditional mysteries, because in the traditional, it seems to detract. And then finally, the investigative approach. Our cozy sleuth usually just goes on intuition. She listens to gossip. She uses her life experience and her knowledge about the community to solve the crime. Whereas our traditional mystery crime solvers will use more logical deduction and forensic details. And again, you can blur these lines if you want, that's fine. But know, as you're doing it, the more cozy elements you have, the better you'll hit that sweet spot of the largely female audience, et cetera, et cetera. And the more other elements you pull in, you can do one of two things. You can bring in non-traditional readers like male readership, or you can annoy your traditional readers and shut them off, and no one knows which is going to work. This is just a list of a number of authors that you may have heard of and what falls in the cozy versus the non-cozy. So Agatha Christie, of course, is the cozies. I was surprised that the #1 ladies detective agency was considered cozy. Joanna Fluke and Diane Mott Davidson, they have the culinary mysteries. You see Laura Childs, again, tea shop and scrapbooking. That falls into that second act sort of sleuth. There's the Library Lovers and the Cupcake Bakery Mysteries, Coffee House Mysteries. And before True Blood became a big thing, there was this author known Charlene Harris, who was making a decent living as a cozy mystery writer, doing gardening mysteries and some other things. And one of her characters was Aurora Tea Garden. And then she created Suki Stackhouse, who could hear vampires. True Blood took off, and she now does a lot of different things, but she got her start as a cozy mystery writer. And man, am I hoping for that same strike of lightning. Aren't we all? So Sue Grafton and Janet Ivanovich, it surprised me, but when I asked, I used ChatGPT to ask a few questions, and I said, you know, do you think these would fit traditional or cozy better? They landed on the traditional side, but you know, those of us that like romance also kind of claim Janet as one of our own. And then you've got Arthur Conan Doyle, who is boring. I love Sherlock Holmes, but he was boring in that writing. Dorothy Sayers, P.D. James, and one of the ones that I like, Harlan Coben. So those are some authors that you can look at. I will make this available to you so you can go back and look at these slides if you want. So let's talk about how to plot a mystery. And by how to plot a mystery, I mean how I plot my mysteries, because I don't know how other people do it. You need to know yourself first. And it starts with knowing what kind of a writer are you. Are you a draft writer who writes one draft all the way through and then goes back and edits and adds a second draft and a third draft and layers things in, or do you edit as you go? I think knowing yourself about that, and we're all a little bit of both, that will help you as you think about how to plot the mysteries. Now, Vicki and I had a great discussion on the way up here. Turns out she is more of a plotter and a draft writer, and I am more an edit as you go and a pantser. And so we have very different processes. Does that mean we don't both come out with good books? Of course not. So know where you are, and anything I say, tailor it to what works for you. And we're all actually a hybrid, little bit of both. And the other, what kind of a writer are you, is, are you a draft? Wait, oh, okay, look at that. It put itself in there twice. Wondered where my build went. What kind of a writer are you now? Are you a plotter who meticulously outlines everything, has synopses and detailed plots and detailed scene lists? Are you a pantser who knows a couple of items and then lets the rest unfold for you? And again, we're all a little bit of both. I lean to the pantser side, some lean to the plotter side. When you're doing a mystery, you're going to have to bring out your inner plotter, because there are some plot things that just need to be done. You can't pants your way through the whole mystery. So I always begin with a crime when I'm doing a mystery. I need to know who dies, how they die, who killed them, and why the killer killed them. And this is where I spend the bulk of my research time. And this is what I call plotting. And this is what I call the essential part of plotting for the murder mystery. So right now, I'm researching things like rigor mortis, when it sets in, what it does to the body, and how long it lasts. I bought a t-shirt and it says, "Don't look at my search history. I'm a writer, not a serial killer." I need to start wearing that more often because I research some really weird things. You want to determine your killer's means, motive, and opportunity. And along the way, you're going to develop a backstory for the victim. And the shorthand that works for me is I think of this as the GMC portion of my murder mystery. It functions the same way GMC does for romance writing in driving that plot forward. And of course, the murderer does have motivations for why they kill. They do have conflicts. You want to set this up so it looks as if he could get away with it, he or she, but there's got to be a fatal flaw so that your sleuth can come in and save the day. As you populate the world, there are a couple of things to think about, and here's what I alluded to earlier. You've got a cast of secondary characters, and you have series characters that are going to appear from book to book, and that's going to be your small town community. In my case, it's the people that work at the spy organization. They often move all over the place, so I find that helpful, and for reasons I'll get into. But in each book, you have another cast of secondary characters. So in my first book, where I had the scientist find her boss dead, I realized I need suspects, and those are my secondary characters. So I created an entire office wing that had vice presidents of each of these different functional divisions. And I pulled all this from my real life and as much as possible. And so in creating that wing of the vice presidents and the administrative assistants for them and certain researchers within each of those umbrella parts of the organization, that's how I made characters for the book. Most of them did not move into the second book. They just disappeared with book one. In book two, the book characters center around a lab that our team thinks might be producing illegal drugs, and they want to investigate it. So the suspects are there. But in both books 1 and 2, the secondary characters of the couple that runs the barkery in town, which is the Dog Treat Bakery, is always there. The best friend is always there. After the first boss dies, we pull a character that was a secondary character in book 1, and he becomes a series character in book 2. A couple of the admins stay on and they become part of the core world. So you have to work with both of those sets of secondary characters, and they each do different things for you. Do you have detectives or law enforcement involved in your crime? If you want to be realistic and have it a little bit real world, you're going to have them involved. But do they help your protagonist or hinder your protagonist? And a lot of people, myself included, will do a small enough community where they can have their sleuth eventually hired as a consultant with the police department or something like that, so that, or have them consult for a private detective agency. So that brings some legitimacy and some ability to suspend disbelief in terms of working with the police. But they can be both antagonistic and helpful. Every character in your book, and I'm talking about the book characters, I think I say that here, yes, the book characters, not the series characters, they all have a secret. Every suspect has a secret. That secret will either prove them. You may not have heard online, but we had Siri interrupt and talk about law enforcement for a moment. So again, I'm a writer, not a serial killer. So some of the secrets of the criminal or the suspects will prove them guilty, and some of the secrets will prove them innocent. But nobody wants to share these secrets. So again, I'll go back to my book 1. The admin to the difficult boss pulled a prank on him, which involved stirring some laxative into his coffee grounds to mess with his morning coffee and see what would happen. And she is embarrassed by that, especially when he's killed, and she thinks she might have poisoned him with this little prank. So once you ferret that secret out, you then eliminate her from the suspect list. That secret has proved her innocent, but somebody else has secrets that might prove them guilty. And that's how we have to work with things with those characters. And when I'm stuck, I always go back to what's the secret and who has it. The victims, they had secrets too. Some of those secrets might be what got them killed. And that might shed light on who might be the villain. So one of the secrets we find out about the first boss is he's having an affair with somebody. Is that important? Does that point to the criminal? I'm not going to tell you that part. Because we need to have false leads, red herrings, and critical clues. And that's the next thing you're going to mix in there. The clues can lead to character secrets, and character secrets can lead to the clues. And that becomes a driving force in your book as well. You're going to want your sleuth to follow a lot of false leads because you don't want her to find the answer immediately. It's kind of cheating when you watch TV, because if you watch an hour-long show, it's really a 40-minute show. But if there's an early suspect, my husband does this now too. We look at each other, go, can't be that person, too early in the plot for it to be that person. So your red herrings come earlier in the plot. And as writers, we know this and sense it. And sometimes it disrupts our enjoyment. You know, 3/4 of the way through, you're like, there's the twist. And now I know who the killer is. And sometimes you know it there. But we have to work to hide our clues, just like everyone does. And so one way to hide clues is to mention it in passing, but not dwell on it. You have to put those clues in there and play fair with the reader. They have to have a chance to be able to figure out who the killer is. If you've got a list of things that happen, bury your clue in the middle of the list. So the sleuth walks into the dead man's office and she hears the computer beeping, trips over a cup of coffee on the floor, notices a really odd smell there that smells like burned something and sewer gas, and then sees the dead body laying there with its hands all curled up. Well, that power position, number 1 and number 5, are going to be what things people remember. And buried within that list of things that I just verbalized is a clue, or maybe 2 clues that you might not notice because they're sort of buried in with a bunch of other irrelevant stuff. And that's how you're going to hide clues from your readers. And then, like I said, some of the red herrings may lead to actual clues. So when you follow the affair that the dead man had, that may be, if it's a red herring, it may lead you to a different clue that somehow drives the mystery. Next, when you do mysteries, you want to plan to do a series, and you want to have a series arc. So in each book, you're going to solve the individual crime. But from book to book, you have to have a reason for your readers to come back, and that's that series arc. So, for example, let's take a heroine who moved to a small town to help her mother who'd become sick, and mom ends up in the hospital with an illness, and she's put into a medical coma. And the sleuth is staying there to help her mother, and she's reinventing her life while she's doing it. But right before mom slipped away, she said, "I meant to tell you you were adopted." So the sleuth, in addition to solving the mystery, may have her own mystery of trying to find out who her birth parents were. And that might carry you through 2 or 3 books while she's looking for the birth parents. And you'll have a cliffhanger about that that will make the reader want to read the second murder mystery. So you'll solve the murder, but you'll leave something in the series arc that makes the reader want to keep reading. And maybe 3 or 4 books later, mom wakes up and the daughter says, "What did you mean I was adopted?" And she said, "Oh no, honey, I gave birth to you, but the man you thought was your father wasn't your father. And it was a party in college and I didn't know his name." And now she's looking for a single person that her mom knew in college. And so I've twisted her series arc, make her look for something else. I keep bringing the readers back with that. So you want to be able to modify and twist and change things like that, which leads me to a couple of tips. I think that's the next slide. No, it's not. Next slide's relationships. The primary relationships in the mystery are the sleuth and the community, not necessarily significant others. Secondary characters, I put mine in for comic relief. They can be used to show characterization, setting, all of the reasons you might use them in your romance novels. Those characters or the community or the traditions may provide that spark of insight that gives the sleuth a way of looking at things. But your secondary characters also are going to interfere with solving the mystery and lead the sleuth down wrong pathways. As the series develop, the relationships change, and that's in your series arc, not your book arc. And so that's for your series secondary characters. And then you have your interrelated characters for the book. And as I said before, I think murder mystery readers love that series arc and love those relationships within the series. They just don't realize that that's part of why they're reading the books. It's not all about the mystery. So, is romance forbidden in a mystery? What do you think?
No, it's not
No.
forbidden.
So again, we go back to the blurry lines here. I think romance can and does happen in a mystery. It is usually a secondary plot line, and it usually happens over the course of the series arc. And so what we have to do as people who are trained in romance writing is put the brakes on and slow it down, because that series could go, if you're popular, it could be 20, 30 books, and you still want those romantic arcs to make sense within the books. And so think of romance writing as microwaving a meal and murder mystery writing as putting it in the crock pot on simmer. Or if you can do anything slower than that, slower than that. There's no sex on the screen, so you're not going to get away with that. The sexual tension within a murder mystery, too, think of that as a garnish, not as the main course or the driver. So I have one sexual tension scene, I'm playing off the two male heroes, the cop and the spy, with my heroine. And as I'm doing that, at one point I have to build a lot of sexual tension. I have my main character heroine undercover, and the spy is pretending to be her ne'er-do-well, just out of college boyfriend, and she's pretending to be an undergraduate chemistry student. They're good with their disguises, they can pull it off. But they're at a gathering place where her best friend walks in. My heroine's best friend walks in with her husband at dinner. She turns to the spy and goes, "Oh no, I'm about to have my cover blown." And he immediately grabs her face and kisses her. And he says, "Wrap your legs around me." And they start making out in public in this restaurant as he maneuvers them while keeping their faces hidden and maneuvering them to a door that goes outside in the back so that she's not seen by her friend and her cover isn't blown. And during that scene, things get a little hotter and heavier than they might think in the alleyway until something happens that brings them back and makes her say, "Wait, it's just a cover, it's not real." And so I build the tension, but then I immediately step back from it and I make sure that there's a logical reason for having that tension. That is, hide your face from your friend. And then later on, a clue was buried in that scene, so I can't pull it out without destroying the mystery. So those are ways you can use sexual tension, but then you have to go back to not doing as much of it. In this, I want to say, as you're thinking of a long haul series, you as the author, hold back secrets about your main characters. So I have my spy and my cop really fleshed out in my character outlines that I did for them. But within that, I'm not telling the reader a lot of things about the character. So I'm writing now book 5 in the series, and you're just finding out a secret about my cop character that I have known from the beginning, but have not revealed to anyone. And then several more stories down the line, I'll reveal a secret about the spy character. But the power of that is, if I wanted to change their backstories, I could do that. So you don't give their whole backstories in the murder mysteries, because you may need to change them to fit plot devices later on down the road. I had a friend who wrote in her series, she had the funeral director and the small town sheriff. And when she decided that the sheriff was going to be the hero, she wanted him to be rich, and she hadn't written that into a backstory, and she told too much about it. And so she had a devil of a time brainstorming an absentee father who owned an oil company and blah, blah, blah. But if she had held back that information from the beginning, it would have been easier. So she's the one that taught me, hold back information from your reader. You want to keep your world fresh and find ways to keep it moving. I call it the Cabot Cove syndrome, when anybody who's new to the small community is the victim or the killer. I tried to get around that by making my spy team the community, and I make them move around as they search for an international terrorist, and they just happen to find dead bodies along the way. But things change enough that my core community has a little bit of a difference, and I hope that makes it get a little bit more longevity. But you'll have to find ways to work around that for yourself. And as I said, mystery worlds are larger and more fleshed out than romance worlds, in that there are more characters in each mystery book because you need the suspects. And in the series arc is probably similar. So pitfalls, what can go wrong? In a long-running series, the relationships can get really stale, and you can actually get very tired of your setting and your sleuth. My friend Denise Swanson, who's a mentor, she writes a Scumble River murder mystery series, and I think it's close to 30 books. And someday she said to me, "I swear to you, I want to make it that my sleuth was actually the killer. She's a serial killer and she committed all the murders, and I'm going to kill her off and send her to jail, because that's the only way I can get out of writing more." So you make sure that you're ready for that long haul. She might not like that I said that out loud. You've got to get techniques to mitigate or eliminate stale relationships, and that's why you'll see multiple romantic leads. Sometimes some readers love it, some readers hate it. If you're going to do it, understand that somebody will hate you for it. You need plot devices to support or derail a romance. And if you watch any long-term series, you'll see that happen. Let's go back to Castle, right? we liked Richard Castle and we liked Kate Beckett, and we liked their relationship. But then Castle gets in with his ex-wife and he starts developing a new relationship with somebody because Beckett's not interested. Then she gets jealous and they bring the relationship back. Then she steps away. And so they're always teasing us with the will he, won't he, or will they, won't they of the relationship to keep it fresh. And so if your series gets fairly long, you're going to have something like that too. But eventually your readers are going to want a resolution. And then you're going to have to find some other driver than the romance to help explore that relationship. And again, as I said, this is the series plot that I'm talking about, not the individual book plots. And here I have carefully guarded secrets. Again, mystery readers enjoy the relationships. And mystery readers may be closet romantics, even if they don't realize it. We might be able to get some of them to read romance fiction. Start with a romantic thriller, maybe. And here's the last big secret, and something you will all like. That is, I think romance authors make the best mystery authors. When I started, my mentor said, here's a bunch of books to read to get a feel for cozy mystery writing. I read a number of them, and some of them bored me to death. Like, here's this lady just sitting around making tea for people and listening to her customers gossip. And number one, I don't think that's how the business works. And number two, I'm bored. And then there were some I said, I love this one. This one is great. Then my friend pointed out to me the ones that you loved most were the ones written by romance authors who turned their talents to mystery. And I think we're good because we understand how to create plots. We understand characterization and we do it very well. Some of the murder mystery writers love the crime so much that I think they do cookie cutter on the characterization. And I will tell you, I read some culinary mysteries for a while. I thought they were a lot of fun. And they were mysteries with a cookbook in it. And the later evolution, they were cookbooks with a little mystery in it. That's not as much fun for me, but the recipes are good. We understand pacing. We don't let that get bogged down for us. And we know how to build worlds, and we know the techniques that draw readers into a story, and that's point of view, GMC, and raising stakes. So those are the things that I think we have in our power pocket. All we have to do is twist a little bit on how we do the plotting. And with that, I say, if you're feeling brave, go ahead and try your hand at a mystery and see what you think. And I'll open the floor to questions. Yes, I have an internet question from Gabe, or Gabe's camera.
Oh, can you hear me? Am
Hi,
I on?
Becky.
Good. Hi, it's Becky. What a
I can't
cool
hear you.
story. You can't hear me? Uh-oh. How do I
Hmm.
turn it up?
Oh, maybe turn off something on your laptop.
All right, hold on. We had a problem with feedback on my laptop and we turned something off. So I'm going to try that, and we'll deal with feedback on this end so we can hear you on that end.
Okay, just let me know when.
JD Robb. JD Robb would be, I say she's more traditional. And she's got the relationship going, so she's using both of her powers there. Any other questions? You'll have to do the chat window thing.
Question.
Yes.
This is perfect for me right now because I've switched from romance to what I call romantic mystery, because I'm doing a 7-book series.
Yep.
And
Feel free to mess with me.
my protagonist is a rookie private eye. She's just starting. And then there's the handsome competitor hero who gets involved.
Okay.
My challenge is with marketing, because I've been told that my books are cozy and traditional. So I'm dealing with written word media. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, with the market. And they literally said I can do both.
So
And so I'm like, I'm kind of like in a murky area.
the question is from here that your name was?
Maggie Fitzroy.
Maggie says she's writing something where she has a rookie PI, so she's kind of got the job of something that would be in a traditional, but there are cozy elements, and she's wondering how you market to both And some of the people that she's contacted with an organization say you can do that. I believe you can do that as well.
Really?
I think, and here's what happened, because I started mine with the science protagonist, which wasn't normal. I made sure everything else was super friendly. So I had these cartoonish covers and cupcake caper and blah, 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 and titles that are plays on words to bring in the traditional cozy crowd. And yet I've had some people read outside that. So my approach, and your mileage may vary, is I'm eventually, these have recipes in them because that's something that the cozy mystery loves. I'm going to pull the recipes out, make a few minor modifications and make a hardcover edition with a different cover targeted towards the more traditional mystery readers. And so I'm going to try that. You can't do it with 2 paperback covers. That's confusing, but if you did a hardcover-ish, and a more traditional mystery reader is probably more willing to part with the money for a hardcover. So that's going to be my approach. The other thing you could do is just maybe run 2 separate media channels and target your things at different demographics.
And see which works better, maybe.
Yeah, it's going to be challenging, and if you want to brainstorm or if we all want to try to work together on stuff like that, I'd love to experiment to see what works. 2 more questions. How about romantic suspense that includes mystery is the next online question. And yes, that's more 75% romance, 25% mystery perhaps. And again, as I said, those lines blur and you're going to get crossover readership. So where are you on that spectrum? A lot of people start with romantic suspense that has a mystery, and then they might pare back some of the romance and go more towards the mystery side. The next question. In cozy mystery, we have a small town. In a long series over time, there are a lot of murders. How can we suspend disbelief and ensure the reader believes that, yes, we can have that many murders in one place? And that's really hard to do. So I would say, and I've seen some people do, so for example, the small town was isolated, but a big city like Walmart guy wants to come in and buy up a bunch of land and make a distribution center, and he's going to build a village next door to house the people that come in with him. And so that way you can get an influx of new people, new characters, and broaden the town a little bit. You can have add suburbs to your small town, or have your sleuth go on holiday in the town next door, or perhaps she goes to a spa that's in the town next door. So things like that will help you. It is challenging, and you're going to have to work very hard at it. But those are ways that I think might help. Next, somebody says maybe a tourist town, and I think that's great. You would want to have a lot of tourists at a lot of different times for a lot of different festivals, so that you constantly brought in a new influx. Your locals would be your series characters, your new people in town that came for the space alien convention are going to be your murder mystery victims, and I'm in that milieu. Something happens, and then next time it's the patriots that come for the Civil War reenactment party, something. So you could build that in, and that would be a great way too. Thanks, whoever said that. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
So I've got another series in mind. I don't know if I'm gonna drive myself crazy or not, but that would be historical. Did you say that's sort of becoming more?
So the question is about historical mystery, and yes, that is something that's becoming more prevalent. One of my favorite historical authors is Amanda Quick, also known as Jane Ann Krantz, and Jane Castle. She has a Tobias March and Lavinia Lake murder mystery series where the two are working together to solve mysteries, and they have a romantic relationship that's sort of on again, off again, but heading towards a marriage and a different partnership. And so she does very well with that. And the nice thing about historical murder mysteries is you don't have to worry about modern forensics. Dorothy Sayers was one of my favorites once upon a time. her Lord Peter Wimsey did play with the cutting edge thing like known as fingerprints, and that was interesting. But if you go back historically, you can avoid a lot of problems or a lot of reality that you have to work with.
Well, the series I'm doing now is set in the 1950s, so I'm doing that. It's more boots on the ground. But then I've got another idea for like 1850s.
So, yeah, as you do it, you just make sure if you're doing something in an alternate setting like the 50s or the 1850s or the 1950s, that you're well grounded with what the state of the art in forensics and things like that is at the time, so that you don't accidentally write something that hasn't been invented yet, and you know what you can get away with and what you can't, and what the structures of police officers are like, and what crime solving techniques might have been at use at the time. All right.
Any other questions?
What's the best size for the protagonist group of close friends? 3 or 4, not sure. Want to give them enough, but so I'd say you have 1 or 2 good friends that your protagonist really knows well. And then maybe 3 or 4 others that are more acquaintance level friends. And that's a good size for a community. The acquaintance level friends might be fellow business owners. In my book, the series, the people that own the Barkery are acquaintance level friends. Her best friend at work is she's a best friend and they share secrets, but because I've set my sleuth up to be a spy, she can't share all of her secrets with her best friend. And that is a driving force that keeps readers reading, because she has to lie to people close to her. They'll have family somewhere that can be helpful. A lot of the families are distant and they aren't living in the pockets of the sleuths, and some of them do. So, anything else?
Looks like that's it. So,
And her historian, look her up.
You're gonna talk so much, we can't do poisons. No, I'm teasing.
They're sort of
Hanging
in
off of what you
between
just said,
traditional and
introducing the characters, I think is a challenge.
but, yeah,
I
she
think,
does really interesting series.
Do you introduce characters as the story unfolds? Do you introduce them all at once as you're setting the plot up?
So the question is about how I introduce characters and whether I do it as the story unfolds or as I'm setting the plot up. And you really, I think, have to do it as the story unfolds. In fact, I tried to introduce too many characters at once, and I had some readers in a critique group that I'm a little confused. And the longer the series goes on, the more challenging things are, because with every new book, I need to, in case somebody picked that up as their first book, I need to introduce the characters and the ongoing series elements with enough depth that they understand what's going on, but not so much that it bores the people who have already read the other parts of the book. Now, because I only bring out about 1 a year or fewer, my readers probably need a little bit of a review, but I have to be careful about how I introduce people. So just like with a romance, you put too many people in and they're going to get confused. If people's names start with the same letter, that might confuse readers. If the names are hard to spell or hard to pronounce inside our heads without a nickname, that might be something. And what you don't want is to make your reader go, this is too much work, I'm going to pick up something else. So,
So Kelly Z. Riley, writer, speaker, scientist, global traveler, martial arts expert, Golden Heart and Feathered Quill finalist, has been in the local newspaper and on national television. Her Undercover Cat Mysteries, The Cupcake Caper, Shaken Not Heard, The Tiger's Tail, Studying Scarlet the Gray, feature a cupcake baking scientist turned sleuth. Her award-winning Riches and Royals romance, Read My Lips, Royally Scandalized, Reluctantly Royal, Counterfeit Commoner, showcase modern women who discover loving a prince is harder than it looks. Her affiliations include Chattanooga Writers Guild, Sisters of Crime, and Romance Writers of America. Please welcome back Kelly Z. Riley.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. During the break, for those of you online, we were chatting, and in some of the goodie bags, I had these giveaways. And people were asking about that. So my giveaway books are, you see each of my 4 covers for the romance series on this one, and I have a similar one for the murder mystery series. I put these together and I published them through Ingram. They cost me about $2 a piece, but they're giveaways that I give at events where I know there are real readers. If I sense someone come up to me at any venue and I know they're a reader and I think they are just wanting to think about things, I'll pass this on to them. I'll give a 10 or 25-cent business card version of this to someone to tell them about the books, elevator pitch style. But if I think a bigger sample will reel them in, it's worth $2 to me. So that's what I've got for those, and I wanted to share that with you. If anybody knows of a less expensive way to print it, I would love to. I did one murder mystery conference called the Sherlock Holmes 221B conference. And in that conference, I had printed at a local print shop according to Sherlock, which is the cat in my murder mystery series. Now, the cat that my sleuth adopts watches a lot of TV while she's at work. He's learned to change the channels and turn things on, and he likes to watch a lot of crime drama. So he has learned, among other things, that when a red dot appears on someone's chest or head, that part of their body tends to explode. When his person is home, a red dot is in the house more frequently than not, and he's very concerned that someone is after his person, and he believes that he alone can save her, as he has saved her and helped solve all these mysteries that she's taking credit for. And so Sherlock versus the red dot, and I passed this story out to people, and we're eating in the hotel restaurant. My husband says, look over there, they're reading your book. They're laughing. Next thing you know, they come over and they buy books. So a sample of your work, if you can do it, is a great way to get traction, but man, it's expensive. So, all right, with no further ado, let's go back to phase 2. This I call the poison pen, how to create literary poisons. I try to be very careful to say we're talking about poisons in literature and in our books. This was originally, it's been through many iterations. We'll go fairly quickly through some of it, and I may do a few minutes overtime with your indulgence. It was also given as a 4-week course that was interactive with the Kiss of Death chapter of writers at one point in time. So as an introduction, come on. There we go. Oh, look, my pointer's working. You already heard who I am. I have a PhD in chemistry, so that's why I write poisons or feel comfortable writing poisons. I've had over 35 years of experience in the chemical industry and over 20 years of writing experience. And these are the covers of the first 4 murder mystery novels. And as a disclaimer, I will say that I've not killed anybody in real life yet. So start with this quote that basically Ralph Waldo Emerson says that of all the poisons, time is the surest one, and that gets us all in the end. But we aren't going to give our victims that much time. We're going to move them ahead. And let's see. The outline that I've got for you is part 1. We're going to spend a lot of time in part 1 talking about the basic science concepts. And these science concepts and where you find information and how you calculate lethal doses of substances is going to be the core of what you need to understand poisons. Once you understand that, you can jump off and do all of the other bits of research yourself. And so we will talk about that. And then in parts 2, I'll talk about cyanide, arsenic, and alcohol as poisons. Then we'll heavy metals, solvents, and gas. And then in the end, we'll do some plant poisons as well. We won't have time to do brainstorming on this, unfortunately. If you want to take a picture of that QR code or have me send it out later, you can download a version of this presentation online through BookFunnel. I see phones up. I will wait till they are down before we move on. Everybody got it?
I don't think we can see it online, can we?
Enough have it, maybe you can share
Can
it
you
on the
email
site.
it to the group, Erica?
Okay.
That way anybody can get it.
So, basic science, this is my science education. When chemical compounds come in various forms in nature, they can be combined or they can be just molecules. I hate it when somebody says something is chemical free because even H2O or O2 that we breathe, that's a chemical in my mind. That's just me. I will use the term salt during this presentation. To a chemist, when we say salt, we mean a water-soluble form of a molecule. We don't mean the stuff you season your food with. If I mean the stuff you season your food with, I'm going to say table salt, okay? Or sodium chloride. So when you hear salt from a scientist, it means a water-soluble form of something. So we have to look at concentrations and understand that. Parts per million is a major concentration form used in scientific circles. It's also known as milligrams per liter, and that's what that mg/L is, milligrams divided by liter. Parts per billion is 1,000 times smaller. That is micrograms per liter, and that's that Greek mu, looks like a U with an extra tail on it, or mcg. So for example, my blood pressure medicine is in milligrams per liter as it's dosed. My synthetic hormone Synthroid is in micrograms per liter. So you will see these in your drug cards if you're looking. And then 1,000 times smaller than that is a part per trillion, and that's ng or nanograms per liter. But that's all kind of hard to understand, and it doesn't make intuitive sense. So I'm going to give you an intuitive way of looking at that. A part per million is a drop in the bucket. Now that's a 55-gallon bucket, right? Put another way, if some major publisher picks me up and I get $1 million advance and I give you $1, I've shared with you a part per million of my advance.
Looks good.
Pretty cool, huh? It's a lot of money, right? A part per billion is a drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Or if I got a $10 million advance because that luck factor just hit in there and I give you 1 penny, I've given you a part per billion of my romance or my royalties. And then a part per trillion is a drop in the ocean. Put another way, Uncle Sam got $1 billion in tax revenue this year and he gave you back 1 penny as a refund. Not inconceivable, I think, some days. That is 1 part per trillion. That's not much. So your visual metrics for you are drop in the bucket, drop in the swimming pool, drop in the ocean. When you're reading those numbers, that will help you. Now, when you're researching poisons, your primary reference is going to be something called this, a material safety data sheet, or MSDS. And about a dozen years or so ago, we decided to get on board with everybody else across the universe, the world, and we dropped the material from it and called it an SDS. But you will find them listed under both names. Some other things happened there, like the hazard rating system globally was the exact opposite of the hazard rating system in the US. And so now every time somebody tells me the hazards, I get really concerned. I have to make sure what scale I'm on. Really, for those of us in the industry, a little bit of a change. But anyway, for those of you researching poisons, that's going to be your primary source of information. And this will be, usually there are sites online that can give you many of these for free, others for a small subscription fee or a small one-time fee, you can get them. And in fact, anything that you purchase, the supplier is obligated to make those available for you. So what are you looking for once you get that MSDS or SDS? There are about 16 sections to it. You're not going to need all of them. What you are going to look for is the toxicology sections, that's section 11. I will show you later. You're going to look for something called the LD50. That stands for the lethal dose at which 50% of a test population died. The test population could be mice, it could be rats, it could be fish. It could be any kind of a number of different animals that they do toxicological testing on. So an LD50 is the dose at which 50% of the animals died. If it's a gas, they call it an LC or a lethal concentration 50. Another thing that you might run into, is the LD low. That's the lowest known dose of this toxin that's been known to kill. You might see that somewhere. Those LD50s are given in amount of toxin, we'll just call it poison, per kilogram of body weight. So the bigger the victim, the more the poison they need because it's ratio to their body weight. And I'll give you a couple more places where we talk about this and show you how to work with it. But here's an example of the Section 11 toxicological information for some substances. I want to bring your eye, first of all, to this. You see here the 2 LD50s for a mouse. The route of entry into the body makes a difference. So in this mouse LD50, the oral LD50 is, you gotta read it, 600 milligrams of toxin per kilogram of body weight. But if you inject it intravenously, it's only 156 milligrams. So it matters whether you're feeding your poison or injecting your poison into your victim. And you're going to assume most of these mice have been bred to have similarities to human interactions. And so you're going to assume that what you get for the mice is going to work for the people, because surprisingly, they don't test LD50s on human populations.
What a shame.
The toxicity is also species specific. So you see in the outline sections here, the rat versus the mouse, they have very different LD50s. And the mouse is more like the humans. So the dose makes the poison. So if you feed your dog a little bit of milk chocolate, he's probably going to be okay. And if you feed him a lot of dark chocolate, he's probably not. Still feeding the dog chocolate, which you don't want to do, but it's the amount that matters and the size. So when you're searching for poisons, these are the search terms that you're going to type in. Let's say we want to look at fentanyl poisoning. Why not? It's been in the news lately. So you'd say, I want symptoms of fentanyl poisoning, and you start to look at it. Or you would say fentanyl LD50. See if you can pull up an SDS for it. Or fentanyl MSDS or SDS. And those would be the ways you would use the prospective poison and then those terms SDS or LD50 or symptoms to get most of your information. And so as you'll see throughout this presentation, when I talk about different toxins, this is how I got the information on them. So while you're looking at this, the one thing to remember, the smaller the LD50 number, the more toxic the poison. Because that number is how much you have to ingest for every kilogram of body weight in order to die. So I have here what I call a twisted story. Back in my days as a fledgling writer and a new chemist in industry, I started going around to my customers or my colleagues. And I said, if you were going to kill somebody, how would you do it? And they invariably said, I don't know about that, but I know how I blah, 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 blah. And I got some really interesting stuff. That was when I worked in the Chicago area. I moved to the South for a job and I went to my new colleagues and I said, if you were going to kill somebody, how would you do it? And they said, shoot them. I said, well, what if you wanted to get away with it? They said, use a long range scope and shoot them. So I got significantly less interesting stuff to work with from my Southern colleagues. Although I did have a few that were helpful. One said, I don't know about killing people, but I've been fascinated about putting poison ivy oil on a doorknob and see what happens. I'm using that in a book. I'm using that as a misdirect in a murder mystery novel. I'm going to have my victim, my killer, be not sensitive to poison ivy and everybody else sensitive to it. And a ton of people are gonna break out and the body will be found in a poison ivy bag.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
A zip tie around the neck.
All right, somebody in the audience said they would kill with a zip tie around the neck. All right, twisted story number one from my colleagues. A marketing manager came to me and said, well, no, I read about it. He came to a scientist and he said, you've given me the LD50 in rats, you've given me the LD50 in mice, you've given me the LD50 in minnows. I need to know the LD50 for children. If somebody came to me, I'd say, well, how many kids you got? Because it's the dose at which half the test population dies. So which of those 4 beautiful children, which 2 of them do you want to die when you're testing your poison, right? You gotta know what you're talking about. All right, we're gonna play a game now. We're gonna play a game that I call poison versus poison. Everybody remember what I told you in these last slides a minute ago? All right. I am going to give you a couple of poisons and you are going to tell me which one you think is more toxic. And I apologize again, those of you online on Zoom, I can't hear you. You'll have to do number 1 or number 2, I guess. Poison number 1, cyanide with an LD50 of 10 milligrams per kilogram. Or arsenic with an LD50 of 14.6 milligrams per kilogram. What?
Cyanide.
Cyanide number 1, or okay, those of you that said number 1, you are correct. The smaller the number, the more toxic the poison. All right, we get to play round 2. So if you didn't make round 1, that's okay, we got round 2. Cocaine, 17.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Atropine, 0.03
Definitely atropine.
milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Which is more toxic?
Atropine.
Atropine number 2, because the smaller the LD50 number, the less you have to take of it before you die.
Can you really get cyanide? Isn't it from peach pits?
You are jumping ahead. I was
Oh,
asking
I'm
cyanide
sorry.
from peach
My
pits.
bad, sorry.
And that's okay. Yes, that is one source.
I like poisons.
There are many sources. I like poisons too. Somebody once, I was selling books and they said to me, how do you have time to write? And out of my mouth popped the words, you know, ever since I started writing about poisons, my husband took over all the cooking for some reason. He thinks that's pretty funny too. That's not the reason he did it, but it's a great selling point. All right, we're gonna
It's a great way
calculate.
to get out of cooking though. I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. We're gonna calculate together some lethal doses. We're gonna go through the steps on how to do that. So, we're gonna talk about first weights, so you understand what LD50s and LC50s are. And those of you in the room that have your goodie bags, get ready to search through it in a minute, because in 2 slides, we're gonna be needing it. But first of all, 1,000 micrograms equals a milligram. 1,000 milligrams equals a gram. And 1,000 grams equals a kilogram. And just for fun, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So a gram is actually 0.035 ounces. That's a weird metric. So inside your goodie packets, you'll find a packet of sugar, like you might find it at the table when you go out to a restaurant. A typical sugar packet contains between 2 and 4 grams of sugar. So there's your mnemonic, 2 to 4 grams of sugar in that packet. A Splenda packet, artificial sweetener, that weighs about 1 gram. So if you need a visual for that, there's your visual. So when you're calculating your lethal dose, you're going to go through 3 steps. You're going to find the weight of your victim in kilograms. So if you have it in pounds, you're going to convert it. You're going to multiply the LD50 by the number of kilograms that the person weighs, and that's going to give you the amount of poison you need. And then if you need to, you can convert milligrams to grams to make it an easier visual. So let's look at a theoretical 150-pound victim. Step 1, we got to figure out what he weighs in kilograms. I was at a surgical center. with my sister, in law the other day. And a guy jumped on the scale and it said he weighed about 100 pounds and he looked like he weighed about 200 to me. Well, it said he weighed 100 and he looked about 200 to me. And the nurse said, oh, that's in kilograms, not pounds. So he probably weighed 220. Anyway, so to convert for our victim here, 150 pounds multiplied by each kilogram has 2.2 pounds. That comes out to 68 kilograms. Okay, so what you do is you divide the 150 by the 2.2. So we know the victim's weight in kilograms. Now, we picked a poison just for giggles and grins that says the LD50 is 600 milligrams for every kilogram of body weight. So since he weighs 68 kilograms, we multiply 600 by 68, and we get the doses of 40,800 milligrams or 40.8 grams. So that's how much poison you would have to introduce to the body of that type if you were going to use that in your mystery. And go back now to the mnemonic. If you think of your sugar packets, that's the weight of 10 to 20 packets of sugar that you pull off of a restaurant table. Do you think it would be easy to introduce that much poison to a character?
No.
No, that's not a good poison for this particular character. Now, when I taught it as an interactive class for several weeks, we had a homework where I'd give you a list of poisons to pick one, and then I'd have you create a victim of a specific gender and weight and calculate the lethal dose to poison that victim. So if you'd like to try, you're welcome to try. You can grab a screenshot of this, or as I said, this presentation will be available online. So now that we know how to calculate dosages, what I'm going to segue into is talking about specific poisons, what they do, where you get them, and how you can work with them. And we are all going to be thinking about what is it going to take to suspend disbelief and make somebody, reader, believe that a person could be poisoned by this stuff. I don't know that any of this works in real life the way we talk about it here, because remember, only 50% of the test population dies. The other doesn't. So we're going to be talking about literary poisons. Cyanide. The salts would be hydrogen cyanide, potassium cyanide, or sodium cyanide. It is also known as Prussian blue in paint. There's a picture of some of it. And there's your chemical complex, iron ferrocyanide. And this particular material, the iron at the middle of it surrounded by these CN groups, that's the cyanide group. This is the iron molecule that would carry oxygen in your blood. And normally you would have oxygen bound to that iron instead of cyanide bound to the iron. So what cyanide is doing is kicking the oxygen molecule out and taking over that space. That's a little geeky, but
Is that why people turn blue?
that's part of it, yes. So cyanide is purported to have an almond type scent. And interestingly enough, in my research, I found out some people have a genetic mutation. They can't smell almonds. They can't smell cyanide. That would be a quirky thing that you might work into with either a sleuth or maybe a law enforcement officer who couldn't smell the cyanide trace. Or it might be a misdirect. Somebody might have just had amaretto coffee. What happens, as I said, I went all geeky on you there for a minute, but it's a form of chemical suffocation. Takes the oxygen out of your blood and causes you to collapse. Usually that's 2 to 5 minutes till collapse, anywhere between 15 and 45 before you die. And that bluish skin, that tone, is because when the blood is full of oxygen, that's when it turns that bright red color. If you've displaced the oxygen, that's where you're starting to get that bluish color.
Is there a cure for that? Like if you got somebody in the hospital on time?
There is. There's a cure for it, and I'll get to it in a minute. First, we'll talk about where do we get it? And you were absolutely right. It comes from stone fruits. So it's in peach pits, plum pits, almond pits, cherry pits, apple seeds, and almonds.
You'd have to have a lot, right?
Somebody,
To get it from there?
when I was in high school, there was a story of a guy that thought apple seeds were a delicacy and he saved them until he had about a cup of them, ate them all at once and died. So yes, you'd have to have a lot to get the dose correct. But
Because
that's
they say you can eat an entire apple, that it's okay.
right. But if you save a full cup of apple seeds and you eat them all at once, your body's not going to be able to, so your body can handle a little disruption and fix it.
Well, would it matter to, like, if you chew them or if you swallow them whole, like, is there a difference?
There's probably a difference because if you would chew them, you would,
Maybe release it?
you would release it and you would absorb it more, and there's a chance that they would go undigested and not pulled out. Yeah. Yes.
So we are talking about the seeds, right?
We are talking about apple seeds. Somebody asked in the room, does it matter if you chew the apple seeds or swallow them whole? Another source is raw lima beans. And there's a fruit called cassava or yucca plant. It's a starchy vegetable. There are two kinds, but the roots, yes, the roots and the leaves of it contain cyanide. And it's interesting, the sweet version contains around 20 milligrams per kilogram of cyanide. So it takes a kilogram of fruit or plant, and you can extract 20 milligrams of cyanide from that. The bitter form contains up to a gram, which is a whole lot more. And that has to do with the toxin concentrating in that fruit. And in fact, I keep calling it a fruit. I'm pretty sure it's a tuber. But as in drought conditions, the toxins concentrate much more. They aren't diluted down. So it's seasonally when that tuber was grown may have more or less toxin. And so you can play with that as a means of looking at a poison. Both people ate yucca plant. One died, one didn't. Maybe one ate the stuff that was harvested in a nice spring and the other ate some preserve that was grown in a drought and had more cyanide. Also, cooking and processing before it gets to us as food stuff actually removes the toxins. Now we have a room question.
The raw lima beans,
Yes.
the ones that we get at the store, they're dry. Is that take care of the cyanide or?
I'm going to, the question is, raw lima beans will, drying like we buy them in the store, take care of it. I am going to suggest that it's probably like kidney beans, and I'm going to talk about kidney beans, and there's a process for cooking and cleaning them. So I would be cautious of dried limas.
I have now found out that I can't eat too much.
I should have refilled my water. Would somebody go grab my pink water bottle for me, please? Other sources of cyanide, arthropod secretion, so millipedes secreted. That's kind of weird. Blue-green algae is a source of cyanide bacteria. And strangely enough, no, that's not it. Okay. Different poisons, sorry. Treatments for cyanide poison. So one treatment is to add plenty more oxygen to your body in an effort to kick off some of those cyanide groups and give you more oxygen. Another is to add ephedrine, which is going to help you, thank you very much, metabolize it more quickly. That's about getting your body to clear the system out. Activated carbon is something that absorbs a lot of toxins and poisons, and that's a treatment. Dialysis can be a treatment. And then there's something called chelation therapy. And chelation therapy, a chelate is a chemical compound designed to pull metals out of other places. And so what this does is it presents a compound that wants to interact with the cyanide even more than the iron in your body does. And so the cyanide will jump off of your body's iron and onto this cobalt EDTA molecule. And then that can get flushed out and you can start to breathe again and get oxygenated blood. So there have been some famous cyanide poisonings that I'd like to talk about. Number one, there was a time when cyanide was present in silver polish. And so in large fancy homes of the rich and famous, they would have kitchen staff took care of these things. I read a lot of historical fiction, so I think of the scullery maids cleaning things. But those people would tend to they didn't have hand lotion and good care for themselves. They get dry, chapped skin, cracked. That means you've got exposed mucous membranes, and that can become a route of entry for a toxin, especially if it's in a silver polish and you're not wearing gloves and taking care of your hands. And so a number of people in kitchen staff would die if they had absorbed the silver polish. Then there was a story of people preparing the fancy kitchen for a big fancy party upstairs. And the soup tureen was brightly polished and brought upstairs. And a party guest died because someone had decided it was a good idea to polish the inside of the vessel that held the food. And so people did swallow the cyanide that way. So that's historical. Another famous cyanide poison is a classic locked room mystery where an elderly couple came home, and this was in the 1920s or 30s. They came home from an evening out. They went into their little walk-up apartment and they were found dead the next morning. What was eventually discovered, what happened was that they were fumigating the basement to take care of rats and vermin. And that fumigating rodenticide, the thing to kill the rats, was a cyanide-based poison. It was administered as a gas. And during that time, the building codes, your hot water pipes and your water pipes would pass up from floor to floor through the specific areas. And there were little cutouts for that pipe to pass up, but they weren't insulated and treated. And so the gas could make it through the cracks in the building. And so enough gas made it into the people's apartment that this elderly couple succumbed to the gas and died. Okay, so this was another exercise for those of you that want to get all geeky. In ancient Egypt, there was a punishment called death by peach, which we believe now was arsenic poisoning for punitive purposes. So I asked people to look at a bunch of different peach pits and apple seeds and some other sources of cyanide and figure out how much of each product it would take to collect enough cyanide that you could kill a 200-pound man. Reminding you that determine the weight of the victim in kilograms, multiply by the LD50 and convert to grams if needed, and then figure out how much of the fruit or fruit pits you needed. So on to twisted story number 2. The story is told that back in more ancient times, a lover wanted to kill some of his amours. And so he took an older version of a prophylactic device and he coated the outside of that prophylactic device with a toxin. So when he made love to his lady love, the outside of said device reacted with mucous membranes in the lady love's body. That's a really easy route of entry. The skin and the mucous membranes anywhere, be it your nose, your mouth, or where the lover was going, very thin, very easily absorbed by poisons. And so that's how he poisoned his lovers. That leads me to think that with a little bit of research in the modern day, what would happen if you coated the inside of said device? It'd be interesting. I don't know the chemical compatibility of modern latex and poisons. I'll leave that to you. So I'm going to move from cyanide over to arsenic. And as you can see here, my arsenic, I have this beautiful green historical dress. And I think I've said I like to read like Regency romance, but now every time I read about a woman dressed in green clothing, I wonder how much arsenic she's absorbing. Because arsenic in the 19th century, in the 1800s, it was used in what's called Paris green dye. And Paris green dye was everywhere. It was considered beautiful. It was in the wallpaper. They actually think Napoleon was poisoned partly by the wallpaper of his home. It was made into fake jewelry, like paste jewelry, artificial plants, and of course, fabrics. And so this is the first slide about our arsenic. Now, arsenic was also used in a lot of medicines, and you'll find that many toxins were used as medicines back in their heyday. Makes you wonder about which of our medicines today might be tomorrow's toxins. But that's why we have things like FDA and testing and things to try to get over that and not do it. But in the 20th century, in the 1900s, syphilis and psoriasis were thought to be cured by medical application of arsenic. There was something called Fowler's solution, and Fowler's solution was a liquid. It was a cosmetic, and you applied it to your skin, and it was said to give you beautiful, translucent, ethereal-looking skin. You were poisoning yourself with the Fowler's solution. It was used, arsenic was used as weed and bug and rat killers. And as early as about 20 or so years ago, it was used in pressure-treated lumber, used to build decks, etc., to give the lumber longevity because it would prevent wood-eating insects from consuming it because of the arsenic. So I can imagine, if you will, here's a picture of the Fowler's solution label. I can imagine that if you wanted to kill somebody in a book, you might search out a home that had been recently demolished that had a deck built in the 1950s. And you might take that lumber and soak that lumber and extract the arsenic from it. And that might be a source that I could realistically believe in a book might happen. That's kind of suspending disbelief, but I could fall for that. Here's a picture of arsenic powder. This is a white powder known as arsenic trioxide. It's chemically used in mining and ore processing today. So it does have industrial uses. So there might be ways to get your hands on it from the industrial uses. It was known in years past as inheritance powder. Because if you wanted to get rid of a troublesome relative so you could inherit sooner, you would use arsenic. And this white arsenic powder is one of those salts that works very well for that. So it disperses easily in food and drink. The LD50 is 14.6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. And some enterprising chemist decided he would taste it. And he tasted doses that were not lethal doses, but small amounts, and said it tasted hot, sweet, and acrid. So if I were using this poison and dosing it, knowing what I know now, I would set up my victim so that my victim loved Thai curry. And I would start dosing the poison into a curry-based sauce that had a hot, sweet taste already, so it would disguise the taste of the poison. And one thing that you can do with this kind of application is you can slowly increase the dosage over time so that you can start at non-lethal doses and eventually increase the doses in your person's body until it becomes a lethal dose, at least theoretically for the purposes of writing. What are the symptoms? Well, it mimics the flu or cholera or heart disease. Now, when I start talking symptoms, in most of the poisons I talk about, you're going to find the same range of symptoms. You're going to see a lot of stomach, digestive upset. You're going to see diarrhea. You're going to see vomiting. Why are you going to see those things? What do you think?
Because your body's trying to get rid of the chemical.
Because these are the ways your body cleans that chemical out. Your body is going to try to get rid of that as best it can to save your life. And so that's why your symptoms are going to look similar. Gastrointestinal distress, shortness of breath, so it's interfering with your breathing and your metabolism. And if you're administering it carefully enough in your poison scenario, it could just be mistaken for natural causes. And who knows how many cases this has been that that's true. So how do you detect arsenic? Interestingly enough, it stays in the body after death. You can detect it in the hair and fingernails. And this is how they determined that Napoleon had arsenic poisoning by autopsying his body and seeing on some of those samples that there was arsenic. It actually, this is really both creepy and interesting. It slows the decomposition of the body. It's known as arsenic mummification. So in the times before we added formaldehyde and other preservatives to our bodies and viewed our loved ones. People were just buried. And once upon a time, they dug up a corpse that was over a year old that had died of arsenic poisoning, and it looked almost like a living person. That is how effectively arsenic sort of slowed all of that decomposition.
Have they ever done any testing like on the religious relics where, I don't, have you seen like, the bodies were, they never decomposed?
So
There are
the
some.
question is, did they test bodies and religious relics that appeared not to decompose? And I've never researched that, but that's fascinating. That could be very interesting.
I know that there are a couple Catholic saints, and I think there's also one, like a Tibetan monk or something, who has his body's never decomposed.
There's
That's
like
fascinating.
somebody did it to like their daughter too. But I can't remember what chemical they used to like make sure she like preserved.
All right, we're segueing here into natural
Sorry.
preservatives of people that we've killed. I'm going to talk about cures or treatments for arsenic poisoning, heart medication and mineral supplements, bowel irrigation, so help your body get it out. Do the colonoscopy prep to get the poison out of your body. And again, chelation therapy, where you're putting in a chemical that will grab the arsenic and carry it safely through the body. And this lists some things, dimercaptosacinic acid, dimercaprol. Don't worry about those names. Mercap means something that captures certain chemicals. And you can always look up what kinds of treatments or therapies you would use should you want to rescue a victim of arsenic poisoning. Now I'm going to talk to you about some famous arsenic poisonings. Here is a case of a young woman. We're going to go to the inheritance powder use here. She cooked some stewed dried fruit for her father and brothers, and she cooked it with a chunk of iron ore and served it to them after their dinner. Apparently, the brothers must have been set to inherit everything, and Dad wasn't very nice because she killed them all with this chunk of iron ore. Famous poisoning number 2. This happened in New York in the 1920s, early 1920s, at a place called the Shelbourne Restaurant. And at the Shelbourne Restaurant, apparently one of the bakers there was a bit disgruntled, and so he put arsenic into the pie crust of the pies that he baked that day. And on that day, 60 people were poisoned, and 6 of them were fatally poisoned. Remember this, because we're going to come back to this particular story in a minute. I'm going back to one of my twisted stories, and this is my own thought about quote unquote dirty money. We talked about routes of entry, one being absorption through the skin. Well, if you think of dirty money not just as money laundering or cash for bribes, what if you took money that you intended to use to pay bills and you soaked it in a toxic solution? And you absorb that onto the paper, and then you paid somebody with that paper money. When people count money, what do? They count with their fingers, they count with their fingers. So they'll be ingesting that toxin. And if you were to do that and you had coated your own hands with a protective ointment, or if you put, say, latex gloves under your winter gloves and pass the poison, you would protect yourself, but pass poison money to someone else. So that might be a fun way to administer a poison in a book. Again, I don't know if it would.
In real life, they've actually had people in the drug industry who've died because they've had fentanyl has been floating in the air and it's gotten on the money, and then people have absorbed it through a cut or whatever in their fingers and died of fentanyl poisoning that way.
So we're talking of people that have died of fentanyl poisoning because it did get absorbed onto money from dust, et cetera. So that's not an unusual, crazy idea. All right, so now we're going to do another round of our favorite game, poison versus poison. In this case, I'm going to give 2 victims the exact same amount of poison. And poisons have LD50s based on what? Amount of poison per amount of body weight of the victim. So I'm going to give 2 victims the same amount of poison, and I'm going to ask you, who is more likely to die? Number one, the 90-pound woman, or number two, the 200-pound man?
The woman.
Why?
Weighs less.
She weighs less. Yeah, she's smaller, therefore that dose per kilogram of body weight is higher for her. Round two, a healthy man versus an unhealthy man of the same weight.
Unhealthy.
Unhealthy man.
Everybody knows, number two, unhealthy. So you set your characters up so they're more likely to die by your literary poison. Goes to how you craft that victim. And then last, an adult versus a child.
Child.
The little one's more likely to die than the child. Right, and that all has to do with weight and or general health. You guys are getting really good at poison versus poison. I'm going to talk about alcohol. Alcohol is really fun, and I used it in one of my books to kill somebody. And it's geeky, and I loved it. So some basics about alcohols. The alcohol that we drink is called ethyl alcohol, and that's generally safe within reasonable amounts. There are toxic alcohols, and the two most primary toxic alcohols would be isopropyl alcohol or isopropanol. That's what we call rubbing alcohol normally. And methyl alcohol, also known as wood alcohol. Coincidentally, they have an odd number of carbons in their structure. Ethyl alcohol has an even number of carbons, and we think that has something to do with toxicity. But both of those are toxic alcohols. So in this one, this was fun. This was the only research I did where somebody put the lethal dose as a English metric and said a quarter cup is a bad amount of methyl alcohol to have. The LD50, you can see it ranges from 300 to 1,000 milligrams per kilogram. That probably had to do with the test subjects. It breaks down to formaldehyde and formic acid. And the symptoms would, as you might expect, mimic drunkenness. So you poison somebody with methyl alcohol, they look like they're drunk. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain because the body's trying to get rid of it. Slow respiration, and it damages the optic nerve and the retina, and that's why it causes blindness. And that usually the onset of those, I think, is 12 to 24 hours. So interesting thing about wood alcohol. During Prohibition, ethyl alcohol, the drinking kind, was illegal. And the government actually put toxins into ethyl alcohol for alcohols that were used for fuel production and other things to discourage people from drinking it. And wood alcohol didn't taste all that good. And so the rise of the speakeasy also followed with the rise of cocktails. So the Prohibition era cocktails, and I've listed a number of them for you here, part of their evolution was to hide the flavor of the bad alcohol or the tainted alcohol that they got from the government that had maybe plasticizers and things you ought not be drinking in it. And the poor would do something called smoke. It was water and fuel alcohol, not all that great sounding, but when you're desperate and getting drunk will help you cope with it, you'll do all kinds of things. But that was interesting that the rise of cocktails came for that. And also part of the allure of going to the speakeasy was the thought that you didn't know if what you were getting was good alcohol and you'd live or the bad stuff. So you were really living life on the edge. That is, at least in theory, how people did. There was a particularly nasty one known as Ginger Jake or Jamaican ginger. It contained about 80% of alcohol flavored with ginger, but that was what I said. Remember, the government poisoned that alcohol with plasticizers, organophosphates, and neurotoxins, which supposedly made the buzz a lot better, but it also made you more likely to die from this drink. So the homework was, remember I told you we'd come back to that bakery where the baker put arsenic in the pie crust. You might want to create a backstory for at least one poisoning victim who survived and one poisoning victim who died. And what would be the big difference that you would use in those? Probably their weight, general health, or the amount of pie they ate. So maybe two people weighed the same and one guy had a second piece of pie. He died. Maybe a slender woman died, but the burly guy didn't die. So that's again, playing with your victims. So we're going to move to another class of toxins now, another three, actually. I'm going to talk to you about toxic metals, about solvents, and about gases. And again, some of these are historically interesting, and some of them you can play with even now. So the first, we're going to do toxic metals. Thallium is a heavy metal. It was used as a depilatory. A depilatory is a hair removal product. So it was the precursor to Nair or whatever else we might use. It was also used in pesticides. It was odorless, colorless, and tasteless. It was used as a syphilis remedy. Lots of syphilis remedies, you notice. Must have been a real prevalent disease. Rodenticides, killing rodents. It's used now, even today, in cement and semiconductor manufacturing. It comes from coal combustion, and it might be found in soil and plants. The symptoms of poisoning by thallium are hair loss, neuropathy, which is that tingling in the hands and feet and extremities, diarrhea. Why? Because the body doesn't want it in there. It wants to get rid of it. It'll give you pulmonary edema, which is water in the fluid in the area that surrounds your lungs. Cognitive decline, and it's thought to interfere at a cell metabolism. So there was a TV show I watched a while ago, several years ago, called Royal Pains. Royal Pains dealt with a doctor who went to practice concierge medicine up in the Hamptons. And his patron was this rich guy that thought he was suffering from a genetic disease, and he didn't want to marry and pass on the genetic disease. In about season 3, they determined he was being poisoned by thallium poisoning. And he was losing hair and having all of these classic symptoms. And it looked like he was going into cognitive decline. So how much modern dementia could be really thallium poisoning in disguise? If you're trying to do it in a book, you could get away with it. The treatment is the same as for many of the others. Activated carbon. Ironically enough, one of the treatments for thallium poisoning is Prussian blue or cyanide, because that cyanide complex will grab onto the thallium metal and pull it out of your body. Now you got to play nice with those doses so it gets the thallium and doesn't get your iron. But there are some things that in sublethal doses can be a cure. A couple famous thallium poisonings in Australia in the 1950s. There was a severe rat problem, and there was a lot of infestations, and the government was going around killing the rats. Well, this young housewife, unfortunately for her, lost both her husbands, and both of them seemed to die. The neighbors said, gosh, they died of the same symptoms. That's really kind of weird. Turns out that fatal illness was thallium poisoning that the young woman was using to get rid of her husbands. And so they examined the exhumed remains of the husbands and found the poisoning, and she was killed or was arrested. Let's go to a different metal. Let's talk about lead poisonings. Remember a long time ago, we had lead in our paint chips and we worried about kids eating them and lead poisoning? It's still a thing. We use it mostly today in engine additives, the anti-knock engine additives. There's something called lead acetate or sugar of lead. Sugar of lead was common in the Roman era. It was an artificial sweetener. If you boiled grapes or anything that had an acidic component, that would be something that tastes sharp. It would be like a fruit juice or something. If you boiled that in lead pots, you would form this lead acetate or sugar of lead that tasted sweet to the tongue, but was actually poisoning you with the lead. So you could probably make some sugar of lead today and feed it to your literary victim and get away with it. It can be hard to detect, and the signs and symptoms don't usually appear until after you've had toxic amounts. Here's a chart that shows different areas of the body that are affected by the lead poisoning. And the symptoms, what you might expect, well, there's high blood pressure. Okay. That's new, kind of. Joint and muscle pain, that's a little bit new. Difficulties with memory or concentration. Is it dementia or is it heavy metal poisoning? Headache, and then you've got the abdominal pain and the mood disorders, and it also interferes with fertility. So where do we get lead for lead poisoning? other than boiling grapes in a lead pot. Soil contamination around highways contain a lot of lead because it's in an engine additive, and that uncompletely burned additive comes out the smokestack or the exhaust stack, smokestack from large trucks and regular exhaust stack from other trucks, and it lays down beside the roadways and the soil on the side of the roadways. Depending on the size of the truck, you may get striations and you may get certain areas of soil that are more dense with these contaminants than others. Can be in household dust. It's in a lot of pottery glazes. So if you ever buy something that says not meant for food containment, could be because it has a lead containing glaze that colored it. You can find it in herbal, folk, and traditional medicines. These sorts of medicines are not regulated by any governing body. They're only self-regulated. And if you don't carefully regulate things, you may find poisons work their way in. A lot of things that could be harvested in a field that is next to a field that contains something growing that is toxic, and that there can be cross-contamination there. Lead bullets around firing ranges, so your soil there will get more filled with lead. And then there are lots of occupations that use lead, like in solder, auto repair, mining, pipe fitting, etc. And non-US items like toys. If you get inexpensive toys from a Chinese market, they may or may not have the same regulations about lead paint and lead contaminant that we do. And so some of those may be sources of lead as well. How do you treat it? Chelation therapy, same way we treat other heavy metal poisoning. Could be either chelation by an oral or an injected version. And now some famous lead poisonings. Beethoven, famous composer, he died. He had a lot of irritations during his life, sensitive stomach pains, personality changes, depression, and anger issues. He was so concerned about these that he asked scientists to please hold on to his body and examine it after his death to see if they could find anything out. They later did tests and found that he had an abnormally high amount of lead in his body versus other contemporaries. So we think his young death was due to lead poisoning. It might have caused his deafness and other issues. Moving on to a new metal, let's look at mercury. Mercury poisoning. You might know it as cinnabar or calomel. Those are other mercury containing items. You have elemental mercury. That's that pretty silvery stuff that it's called quicksilver, and it beads up. Used to be in thermometers. When I bought my first house, there was about a little 8-ounce jar of mercury in the basement. It was heavy. It was an electrician. It was used a lot in electrical switches where you had a switch, and when it tilted one way, the mercury would slide down and it would complete a circuit and turn on a light switch or a thermostat. And when you tilted it the other way, it would slide away from the contact and the contact would open and you wouldn't get electricity. And that's how a lot of old style thermostats used to work. There are also salts of mercury that give you mercury bichloride. That's one of them, and methyl mercury is another one. Those are two other forms of mercury. They used to be found in lots of things, from thermometers to the switches I talked about. We've rooted out most of those, but they're still in some areas.
Well, I actually had mercury poisoning,
Did you?
and I had all of my dental fillings removed and most of my symptoms went away.
So one of our live audience talked about mercury amalgams from her dental work causing mercury poisoning symptoms.
Well, and possible, they used to put it in a flu shot as well.
Oh, did they? They used to put it in flu shots? Wow. As a
I mean,
preservative?
I had all of that stuff removed. It was probably 23
And-
years ago, but I'd had the flu shot a couple of years, and but once I had all my fillings replaced
Mhm.
with ceramic inlays, like most of, I still have some like residual tremors and things like that, but it was horrible for about a year.
So yeah, so there are, the point of this discussion about the fillings and the other sources of mercury as a preservative in some early vaccines is that some people have been exposed to it, and there are some more sensitive than others that still have effects from it. Some of the symptoms from the vapors, you see here on the left, anxiety, depression, irritability, memory problems, numbness, tremors. And then on the right, the abdominal pains, decreased urine output. So your body's not getting rid of it as quickly as it can, and you can go into shock. The treatments, chelation therapies help. It doesn't create a cure, but it helps. And dialysis to remove it from the blood is also one of the cures that helps. So what historical mercury poisonings do we know? In the 1920s in New York, there was a grandmother that for whatever reason got into a big argument with her granddaughter over an inheritance. And so after a while of arguing, grandma sent what the daughter thought was a gift, a thank you gift. And she sent her dried figs as a thank you, or as a conciliatory makeup, let's make up gift. And she sent it with the younger brother, and she cautioned the young man that he was not to eat these. These were for the granddaughter. He should not eat any of them. Well, she had rubbed them in mercury and a mercury bichloride. And when the granddaughter ate them, she got very, very ill. This story actually has a happy ending because she got rushed to the hospital and she was cured, but Granny was arrested and tried for trying to poison her granddaughter with mercury. Second mercury poisoning, actor Olive Thomas and her husband Jack Pickford. They were the celebrity couple of their day in the 1920s New York. So they were everywhere. They were high partiers, high flyers, having fun. They were the ones everybody wanted to be. Everybody wanted to be with Jack, and he didn't mind if all of the young ladies were with him. So his wife didn't like that too much, and that was a source of tension in their marriage. But after a night of partying, the couples turned in and Jack fell asleep and Olive was having trouble sleeping. So she went into the medicine cabinet and she picked up what she thought was sleeping medicine. It was Jack's syphilis medicine, which contained mercury. And when she swallowed it, she realized she'd swallowed the wrong thing, but there was no going back. And she later died of that mercury poisoning. Interesting. It's what the fourth medicine I've told you was for syphilis. As I said, quite prevalent in the day. Now, I think this is my last heavy metal story, but this is an important one. Radium. Radium is that Marie Curie discovered this. It glows in the dark, and it's used today in radiopharmaceutical imaging, and it is very similar to calcium. And so a radium ion can replace a calcium ion in your bone or teeth or the minerals in your body. And so it damages you by replacing the minerals in your body. It's used in mining applications now. Trace amounts are found in most rocks and minerals. And it decays into radon gas, which is not that big a deal because your skin will stop any damage from that. It's internal ingestion that's the problem. There's Marie and Pierre Curie, who did a lot of work with radium. General radiation poisoning gives you nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Body's trying to get rid of the crappy stuff. Headache, fever, dizziness, weakness, internal bleeding. But the big thing is that loss of bone mass. And so what I'm going to tell you about are these young ladies known as the radium girls. The radium girls are tied to the story of World War I and the advent of wristwatches. So in World War I, there was what was known as a trench watch. You needed to be able to use both hands to operate your artillery, and yet you needed to be able to get to know the time. And prior to this, men carried pocket watches, or women carried small watches pinned to their clothing. There was no such thing as a wearable watch other than the pocket watch. You can't be using the pocket watch to take out of your pocket and flip open to see the time easily. You need to have a wristwatch that will show you the time, needs to glow in the dark so you can look at it and still have your hands free for your wartime efforts. And this was part of the officer's kit for everyone on the war front. And it needed to be, as I said, luminous and unbreakable. And so there arose this industry made possible by the magic of radium that was creating glow in the dark watches. For young women who were at home during the war, this represented a huge employment opportunity. So all the men are off fighting the war, the women are home trying to keep body and soul together and industry running. So the US Radium Corporation hired young women to paint the numbers on the dials of the watches. They earned about 5 cents per watch. They could make about 200 watches per day. And so their potential income would be up to $10 a day, which would calculate out to about $3,000 a year. Now, the last time I did the calculations was in early 2021, and that worked out to about $40,000 a year, which is a very respectable income for a young woman living at home with no other employment opportunities. Adding that to the family's income would be very, very helpful. And so many young women flocked to this job because it paid well. When they were painting these watches, they were taught to sharpen their brushes or tip the brushes. They were taught to use their lips to bring the brush to a tight point, then dip it in the radium paint, paint the dials, then tip the brush, paint the dials, tip the brush, paint the dials. And of course, the girls want to work as fast as they can because they want to make a lot of watches and they earn plenty of money to help their families. It caused the radium to begin attacking their bones. So there are crazy stories. There's stories of a woman who went to the dentist to have a tooth pulled, and instead of pulling the tooth, her entire jaw came out. There were other young women who physically their legs collapsed under the weight of their bodies. And women weren't that big back then, but their bones were so weakened that they collapsed. And so a lot of deaths were attributed to this radium poisoning. There are two that I want to draw your attention to. These are survivors of the Radium Girls. One, Mae Keene, she actually lived to the age of 107. And one of the reasons she lived is that she did not like the taste of that gritty, nasty radium paint, and she refused to put the tip in her mouth. And she eventually left her job, and she probably would have been fired anyway, but she wasn't going to do it. I don't know what her family said to the girl that refused to make money for them because she didn't like the taste, but she lived for a very long time. And then the picture there is Mabel May Williams, who also refused to tip the paintbrushes and lived to the age of about 104. And a story about Mabel May is that when she would go home at night, her family would see the bits of radium dust that were around her body and in her hair, and she would glow in the dark like this little pixie fairy. But because she didn't ingest it, that saved her. So I'm going to play another little thought game with you here about poisons. It's called The Case of the Killer Cosmetics. You are a cosmetic, you or the killer you're writing is an independent cosmetic consultant, like an Avon lady or something, and you want to kill one of your customers. I don't know why I didn't do that part, but you're going to use a product laced with toxic metal. Here's your choice of products. You have lipstick, eyeshadow, nail polish, and face cream. Where would you put the toxic metal if you were trying to kill somebody with a cosmetic? What's your choice?
Lipstick.
Or yeah, either one.
Okay, the overwhelming choices are lipstick or face cream. And you're right, actually. So I'm going to eliminate eyeshadow because that's topical and that's likely not to get into your body. Same with nail polish. The face cream could enter your body, especially if you had cuts or sores. But by far the easiest and best choice is that lipstick because you're putting it onto a mucous membrane, a sensitive part of the body, and people constantly lick their lips. And so they're going to get it by ingestion and absorption. So that's back to how are the routes of entry through poisons. Everybody still with me? Doing okay? Do we need a break? All right. Moving on, heavy metals, we've done solvents. I'm just going to briefly talk about solvents and then gases. Inhaled solvents are things like chloroform, petroleum distillates, gasoline, paint thinner, kerosene, lighter fluid, and even your favorite products, Goof Off and WD-40. Those all contain petroleum distillates. Those are all things we shouldn't be breathing a lot of, and they all can be toxic in high concentrations. Chloroform is absorbed via the lungs. There are stories of angels of mercy in old hospitals back in the 20s and 30s again, who would chloroform victims hoping to save them much suffering in the hospital. You get irritation of the throat and the eyes and the chin, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, the same normal things, and then renal and liver damage, convulsions and death. So those might be ways you could kill somebody, and even smart people fall victim to that. I once did a lot of paint thinner and stripping of paint in my house, and chemist that I am, did I think to open the windows? No, I did not, until I started feeling weird, and I said, "You idiot, what have you done to yourself?" So you could do a closed room mystery with those. Petroleum distillates can be either inhaled or ingested. And here you see a laundry list of the same kinds of symptoms that you get with everything. Antifreeze is one of the most common poisons. It's an accidental poison. People's pets get into the antifreeze. It's said to taste sweet because it's related to certain artificial sugar sweeteners. And you see it metabolizes into these toxic substances, glycoaldehyde, glycolic acid, glyoxylic acid, acetone, and formaldehyde. Aren't you impressed with pronouncing those names? And the symptoms can develop anywhere between a half an hour to 12 hours. And you start out just with, the typical symptoms, inebriated feeling, headache, drunkenness, and then they get worse, and eventually it has organ damage, and you can see targeted organs listed on the slide. Another kind of unique one that you might want to use at some point, it's an inhaled toxin, it's mothballs. It's called naphthalene, and it has a characteristic smell and taste. If anybody smelled it, you know what it smells like. I actually had that in my home at one point too. There was a reason behind it. But food that I cooked during the period of time when I had mothballs around, I later thawed out and I ate it, and I tasted the mothballs after I'd cleaned that out. I cannot stand to be near those. I sensitized myself to them, and it just sets my asthma and everything else off. Interestingly, there are certain people with a deficiency in enzyme that increases their sensitivity to mothballs. The same enzyme also increases their sensitivity to aspirin. So that's something to keep in mind if you've got a character sensitive to both of those. A good serial killer might be a nurse or a practitioner there that could notice these, maybe an anesthesiologist. That'd be a great killer. Symptoms of naphthalene poisoning, again, headache, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, all the same as the others. They will disappear once the naphthalene is discontinued, and you'll be able to clear that out of your body. But it does destroy and damage your red blood cells, so your body will have to replenish the old damaged ones with new ones before you're completely healed. Other means, and the deeper we get into this, the more unique and quirky these poisons are. Death by suffocation. I'm going to talk about four things here. I'm going to talk about carbon dioxide, which is known as dry ice. You put it in water and it makes that beautiful smoky Halloween looking stuff. Carbon monoxide. We all have detectors in our homes to look for carbon monoxide poisoning. Then I'll talk about chlorine gas and war gas variants. So the dry ice, that carbon dioxide displaces oxygen in a room. And so in the holds of ships that would ship fruits and vegetables around the world before air conditioning and in early shipping, they would use dry ice to ship and keep these materials cool and fresh. And at the time, certain workers on the ships would decide that they wanted to sleep in a place that was cool, and they would go down to the holds where the fruits and vegetables were stored and sleep in the room with dry ice. And many of them died because that dry ice displaced all of the oxygen. It was heavier than oxygen. Oxygen left the room, the dry ice was there. When you breathe it, That's not meant to sustain our life. It doesn't oxygenate our blood. And so we die of suffocation, chemical suffocation. The same is true with carbon monoxide, which comes from uncombusted fuels. It binds to your oxygen receptors and destroys them and turns the blood. It says that in this case, your blood goes from blue to cherry red, which is interesting that it goes red when that should be the oxygenated look. And it mimics drunkenness. So those are a couple of asphyxiants that you might be able to apply in certain circumstances. If you want to get more clever here, you can mix cleaning products to produce toxic gases. One, if you clean with both bleach and ammonia at the same time, you will release chlorine gas. That is not healthy. You do not want to breathe that. Do not think it will clean your toilet stains. It will probably send you to the hospital if you are lucky. If you are not lucky, it will send you to the morgue. Alkali or lye, otherwise known as sodium hydroxide or Drano, add that to ammonia and you will create a variant of a war gas, something deliberately created and used in the battlefield. It's called phosgene or mustard gas. And they rob the body of oxygen and you die by chemical asphyxiation. So war gas is sulfur mustard. It was called that because it was a brownish yellow aerosol mist. It was also somewhat sticky. So when it would land on the skin, it would stick to the skin. If it landed on damp parts of the body, like the airways and the air passages, it would begin to form sulfuric acid in the fluids of the body. And it would blister you from the inside out and destroy your ability to breathe. That was used in World War II. No, World War I, sorry. But that was a really nasty, nasty way to go. And you can make it in your bathroom if you mix the wrong things together. Caustics and lye. This is one of those. This is the sodium hydroxide alkali Drano thing. It reacts with skins and oils. So if you remember watching the Beverly Hillbillies as a kid and Granny used to make her own soap, soap is made with lye or caustic or Drano, if you call it that, and fats or oils or greases. And you mix that together and it forms soap. And the reaction is called soponification or making of soap. So it actually also penetrates the body and will liquefy body tissues. If you spill it on your hands, you'll go, oh, wow, my hands feel slippery. Well, that's because your hands are turning into soap and you want to rinse that bad boy off your hands. We've all done it in chemistry lab once or twice. You know, you can't really use it as an ingested poison because it's bitter, it tastes bad. So unless your victim is knocked out, you're not going to use it as an ingested poison. But if you don't have a better way to get rid of the body, you can liquefy it to soap in the bathtub. And then once you got all that fat and gook off the body, you could flip the switch and use acid to destroy the bones. So now we come back from how to kill people into writer techniques, and that's suspending disbelief. So you have to use your skills to set up your backstory to predispose your victim to be susceptible to the poison. You want to create your killers that have easy access to the toxins, and you need the motive, means, and opportunity. So and we talked, every character has a secret, and the secret exonerates or helps them. So among the goodies that you have in your bags, you'll see some little crystal gelatin capsules. You can get those at any health food store. You can make your own vitamins that way. Or you can, you know, make pills filled with table salt and get a lot of it into somebody's body and maybe disrupt and create.
I would never do anything like
I gave you just a few.
You take any pills from me?
So here we go. Table salt has an LD50 of 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's not likely to kill somebody unless your victim has high blood pressure and is very susceptible to additions of salt. And so if you set up a characteristic, then you might be able to fill 4 or 5 capsules with sodium chloride table salt, get your victim to swallow it, and have a chance of killing him because you've set him up to have that predisposition. And sodium and potassium together their levels and ratios are critical in heart health and regulating heart health. So even if you can't kill somebody by giving them a lot of sodium, you may send them into cardiac arrest. So you may be able to do a more thoughtful, somewhat riskier murder. And there you go. Hide it in a vitamin capsule, press it into a tablet. So back to my twisted stories. We actually already talked about how do you dispose of a body with the acid and the caustic. So we're gonna skip through that one. And now for the remainder of the time, I'm going to talk about some plant poisons. I'll cover this fairly quickly because I know you've been patient and we've gone on a little bit long here. But let's talk about plants. Common theme in plant poisons is the impact of cooking that plant. Most cooking will destroy the toxins, usually. It can also sometimes degrade or leach the toxin out of the thing. So certain leaves, if you boil them, the toxin leaches out. And certain foods, you're told to boil it twice in 2 different pots of water. But what if you saved that water and all the toxin had leached into it, and you concentrated it, and you used that to make a tea or a broth or a syrup to give to somebody? That might be a way of using a plant toxin and introducing it to your victim. Now, back to the question about the lima beans. Let's talk about the kidney beans. 4 to 5 raw kidney beans are considered enough to be lethal. Vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea happen 1 to 3 hours after ingesting. If you cook them at 212 or the boiling point for 10 minutes, that is long enough to degrade the poison in the kidney beans. And the FDA recommends that you soak the dried beans. If you're using dried ones, you soak them for about 5 hours. You discard the soak water, you rinse them well, and then you cook them. And you're probably going to discard the cook water, or at least make sure you cook it at 212. Well, in the 1970s, a bunch of people died from kidney beans. And here's why. Crock pots came into fashion. The busy working woman could set up her meal in the crock pot, have it all ready for dinner when she came home from work. It was a great thing. We loved them. But for the kidney beans, crock pots cooked at a lower temperature, and it turns out that that lower temperature actually increased the toxicity of the kidney beans by about 4 to 5 times as much.
Wow.
So beans cooked at 176 degrees Fahrenheit could be 5 times more toxic than beans cooked at 212, or more toxic than the raw. And so there were deaths associated with the outbreak of poisoning by too low a cooking temperature on the kidney beans. Asparagus is another thing that can be poisonous. So what we eat are not, those spears are not reproductively mature. If they're allowed to mature into berries, the berries and in the mature things are poisonous. So berries and leaves can be very poisonous from asparagus. And there's a note that sulfur compounds in the shoots, some people can get a dermal reaction. Not enough to actually kill somebody, but it can be an annoying dermal reaction. Another growing plant, rhubarb leaves are toxic. They contain oxalic acid, and that's a nephrotoxin that damages the kidneys. The LD50 of oxalic acid is pretty high, 375 milligrams per kilogram. So that would mean you need about 25 grams of it for a 140-pound human. And they're very, very sour. So it's hard to think that you would get enough rhubarb leaves into a person willingly. However, if you cook them with soda, baking soda, that will neutralize the sourness, because that is a chemical reaction between an acid and a base. It will both neutralize the sourness and make it more poisonous by being more soluble. So if you do that, you may be able to fiddle with the rhubarb leaves. And again, make your victim a little frail, a little sick, a little skinny. You might be able to use rhubarb leaves as a poison. Ergot. I don't know how many of you heard of that, but that's a fungus that grows on a lot of grains, especially rye. It's a precursor to LSD. So ingesting ergot can give you hallucinations. And tainted bread made from these fungus infested grains can cause convulsions and gangrene and things due to restricted blood flow. It was a common cause of death in the Middle Ages. And there are people who think that the witches in Salem were actually women who had ingested ergot-based bread, and the hallucinations that they saw were from poisoning instead of anything supernatural. What you see here, beautiful, beautiful pictures of tobacco. Nicotine is poisonous. A bunch of other things come along with that poison, carbon monoxide, cyanide, hydrogen sulfide, and more. And at once upon a time, of course, it was considered beneficial, smoking. So where would you get nicotine today? You could get it from the plant. You could get it from cigarette butts. You could just soak those things in water and introduce them into your victim. The dose, a few ounces if it's ingested. Interestingly, depending on where it's grown, it may be more or less toxic. And think back to the yucca plant that we talked about. Drought conditions increase toxins in it. So maybe soil conditions or other things increase certain toxins. It's also found in the betel nut palm. That's a nicotine source. And it's absorbed very rapidly through the mucous membranes of the skin. So what would you do if you put it in an ointment that was applied to a cut? Or what if someone had a cut and instead of giving them a bandage, you gave them a nicotine patch to close it up with? That might be an interesting way to kill a person. And yes, I've written about it in a book. Spoiler alert. Symptoms, you'll get blistering, burning, and vomiting because of the topical application of it. And then the nervous system eventually shuts down, and the more pure form of it, the more rapid. And it was used in some of the movies in the South. It was used when people were growing tobacco leaves. It was also used as an insecticide. Nicotine was used for that purpose. I once considered it for biocide, and the lab left, there was a quarter of a gallon jar of nicotine and a big pound of fine white powder, which was, what was the fine white powder? Yeah, it was guaifenesin. It was the stuff that's in Mucinex. Yes.
What makes some mushrooms edible and others poisonous?
So Curtis asked what makes some mushrooms edible and others poisonous. And it would, the answer is I haven't researched it, but clearly some of them contain certain cyanides and toxins in their chemical makeup. Here's Indian tobacco, also known as pukeweed, gagweed, gag root, or vomit wort. The names itself tell you what's going to happen if you get too much of it in you. But it used to be sold as a cure for digestive problems. Another fun one, nutmeg. Raw nutmeg contains something called myristicin, I think it is. 1 to 3 whole nutmegs, or 3 to 15 grams of brown powder can give you a hallucinatory high. The LD50 is high, so most people aren't dying of nutmeg, but nutmeg intoxication and hallucinations are a thing, and some kids get high on nutmeg. So who would have thought about that? There are your symptoms of nutmeg intoxication. Next, an ode to the nightshade family. Those are a lot of vegetables that we like are part of the nightshade family, including tomatoes, tomatillos, eggplants, potatoes, goji berries, and a number of our peppers. Now, normally, what you're going to see is that the unripe fruits or the leaves and the stems are what contains most of the poisons in the nightshade family. Wild potatoes contain a poison called solanine. The green portions, which have more chlorophyll in it than the sprouts, and all of that contain most of that solanine. And so wild potatoes, that's the part you'd want to avoid. If you cook them at a high enough temperature, this is way above boiling point, 340 degrees F, you will partly destroy the toxin. But cultivated potatoes made for eating rarely are poisonous. Tomatoes, solanine, the toxin is found in the leaves and the stems and in the unripe fruits. So I guess fried green tomatoes kind of maybe should limit the amount you have, because I don't know how bad they are with the poisons. But a nice cup of tomato leaf tea is probably going to be a good poison. Man, I had somebody I wanted to kill this character so many ways. Tomato leaf tea was on the list of things I wanted to give to him. All right, ricin. Ricin, I think you all have heard about, then it's said that one molecule would kill one cell in the body. 22 mcg, that's that microgram. It's 1,000 times less than a milligram, either inhaled or injected. You need more if the oral 1 milligram per kilogram is the oral LD50, and a lower numbers is the injected version. Remember I said routes of entry matter. And the symptoms, burning in the mouth and throat if you're taking it orally, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, all the famous symptoms. Death within 3 to 5 days. Where do we get ricin? Comes from the castor bean. So 4 to 8 seeds can get you 20 to 30 milligrams per kilogram of ricin and can be enough to kill. Castor oil processing degrades and negates the toxin. So if it's processed, you're okay. Another source you can get it is called the rosary pea. These beautiful little red decorative looking berries. People used to make jewelry out of them and rosaries. And you can imagine women in poor countries stringing rosaries for a living. How often do they prick their fingers with a needle they're stringing the rosaries on? How often does that needle contain residual ricin from that castor bean and get it injected into the skin? So it's no longer used for that purpose because it can easily kill, and the inhaled dust and pinpricks can be fatal. There was a very famous ricin poisoning in the 1970s where a German, he was a Bulgarian dissident. He was in Russia. The KGB took him out by shooting him with a pellet gun disguised as an umbrella. They shot a little pellet laced with ricin into his thigh, and he later, or his calf, and he later died in the hospital. The guy thought he was just poked with an umbrella. There was a later twist where the FBI found a man in Spokane, Washington, doing research on how much castor bean extract it would take to kill his wife. Again, for those listening and for any government agencies, I am a writer, not a serial killer when I research ricin. Some more toxic nightshades. Belladonna is where you get your atropine. We talked about how great that is. One of the effects of that, dry mouth, urinary retention, dilated pupils, so your eyes get really big and wide with that. And that leads me to my next twisted story. Morphine, the painkiller, was isolated in 1804. And a New York physician decided that he was tired of his wife and he was going to use an overdose of morphine to kill her. But one of the side effects of morphine was that it caused the eyes to dilate into or constrict rather, into those little pinpricks. So to counterbalance that, he first dosed her with some belladonna in the eyes to widen them, to negate the effects and make it harder to find him. I believe eventually he was caught and killed anyway. But that was his method of murder, and combining 2 different toxins with 2 different interactions to try to hide it. There's some pictures of some deadly nightshades. They're very beautiful flowers. Comfrey tea is something known to or purported to relieve flatulence. And there were some deaths caused by that when the comfrey was grown or harvested next to some deadly nightshade. And so that herbal preparation that doesn't have any oversight in how it's prepared ended up having some toxins. Other quirky ones is the bulbs of daffodils can, when chopped, resemble onions, but they are highly toxic. All parts of the lily plant are toxic. So the water from the lily plants and a couple of petals can send you into acute renal failure. How easy would that be to hide that in what should have been an edible floral decor? There are plants known as cyanogens, which are precursor to cyanide. And some of the cyanogens in nature, again, that we're back to the stone fruits, the apple seeds, the raw lima beans and the cassava. Some other cyanogens in the hydrangea plant, the cherry laurel, common laurel, and English laurel would be sources. Acatine is another plant poison, and I show you some pictures of plants that would contain that. Plant-based poisons is a huge field of study in and of itself. And I'm going to just skip through some of the symptoms. Tropane alkaloids are what's in the deadly nightshade, devil's cherry, and belladonna. I want to talk about the strychnine, the Asian vomit button tree. The seeds contain almost 1.5% of strychnine in the seeds. Coincidentally, it also has a very low LD50, where you need 0.33 to as many as 23 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. And that depends on the species you're killing and the route of entry of the toxin. But what I have read and heard is that strychnine kills you by inducing intense muscle cramps. Basically, if you've ever had a Charlie horse, you know how painful that is? This is a Charlie horse in your entire body, including the diaphragm, which helps you draw in air. Where you writhe in agony until all the energy of your body is depleted, then it stops, you build up some more energy, and it starts again. And they say this can go on for hours before the victim dies. So strychnine poisoning sounds like the absolute worst manner of death of any that I've read about.
Can you go back to the one that's before that? I mean, the picture.
The picture of the tree? This one?
No, the trumpet tree.
Oh. Yeah, Angel's trumpet.
I have a tree just like that in my front yard.
Some guy drank a tea brewed with it, and as you said there, brewed it from 2 flowers, and he had hallucinations and cut his own arm off with pruning shears. Yeah. We go back. There are some things that have dermal irritants. So the poinsettias, the mango sap, and mangrove are all things that might be irritating to the skin. One of the dermal irritants that I find really creepy, this manchineel tree. I don't know what region of the world it grows in, but the natives of that region used to tip their arrows in it for poisons. They would add it to poison the water supply of towns or villages or fortified areas. A raindrop that comes off of this fruit and lands on your skin can blister your skin. The dermal irritant is that bad. And so actually there were these people, and they would take their enemies and they would tie them up underneath this tree and just let them be dripped on by the acid poison. Question.
Our famous Google says it's native to southern Florida.
Yeah.
We learned just now.
Yeah,
Thank you, the
it-
audience. It is native to southern Florida.
Southern
So-
Florida and northern South America.
So when you're traveling, be on the lookout for this. Don't camp under it. You listen to enough of this, you're going to be afraid of anything and everything. Some other things, plant oils, Mexican poppy and pennyroyal oil. Those are mostly, I think, dermal irritants. If you drink them, they could lead to death. And then for homework, I had search your medicine cabinet or laundry room or kitchen and find some toxins. Yes, I have a question from the audience.
You didn't mention oleander?
I did not mention oleander.
That is that really?
Yes, that
do
is
you-
really
do you
also.
know oleander?
Yeah, it's also a toxin.
Yeah, it's supposed to be pretty deadly, right?
Yes. And I didn't because I'm buzzing through the plant section so quickly and there's so many of them. There's actually an entire appendix to this large presentation that has yet more plants that you can look up.
There's actually a book that was written called Toxic Superfoods that's in circulation right now, and there is reported a case of a person dying from eating fish because of the oxalic acid. and how much
Oh, yeah.
oxalic acid we're encouraged to eat in our diets right now and how it's really bad.
Yes, oh, wow.
Interesting.
So the comment from the live audience here was about a book called Toxic Superfoods. And it talks about sources of oxalic acid and other things that people have been encouraged to eat as a superfood, and they've eaten too much and it's turned into a super poison. So I'm a proponent of everything in moderation. So I've got my final twisted story for you. And this really isn't a poison, but it's something to spur your thoughts. There's a product called nitrogen triiodide, and they're these gorgeous purple crystals, really super simple to make. And we used to make them in graduate school for fun. While they are wet, they are fine. You can move them around, you can put them anywhere. When they dry, they are explosive. So we used to put little matchstick sizes on the floor, and people would roll their chair over it and go pop, 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 pop. But you know, a big bunch of it sitting around drying could cause a fairly large explosion. So my crazy mind said, well, it's not a toxin, but what if I made a big batch of that? And I went to my victim's house and I packed it in the treads of his tires in a wet, rainy evening. When he started to drive down the road and it dried up, could I cause the tire to explode? I might drive him into a ditch that way. So it was another way to create mayhem. It wasn't actually a poison, but you know, what if you did that? What if you put it on a toilet seat? Yeah, one of my friends, I said, how would you kill somebody? I don't know, but I've always been fascinated by the idea of a contact poison on it or contact explosive on the toilet seat. You are weird. You are sick. You are fun. But no, I will not tell you how to make this. And then I have a section on the references and the research. I will tell you one reference that I love and I highly recommend you read is called The Poisoner's Handbook. It is not actually about a lot of poisons, but it is about the rise of modern forensics. And it goes back to the 1920s in, I think, New York City or areas of New York City, where the coroners used to be appointed as political favors. And the first medical coroner was appointed was a guy by the name of Charles Norris. So I say Chuck Norris, ME. And he hired a chemist friend of his, Andrew Gettler, or Alexander Gettler. And between the two of them, they did experiments and studied poisons and killings and means of death. And a lot of the work they did laid the basis for modern forensic science. So it's a fascinating read, covers a lot of the things I've done here. And it talks about history and culture and all kinds of things. And it's fascinating. So with that, that is the end of my talk. Yeah, there you go. There's pictures of my books, end of this talk. And if you go to it, you'll be able to look at some of the references.